Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. This is UrzaMaster speaking. Joining me as always, Lord Uther and Fert Derby. None of us in phase today as we explore the Tholian web in Star Trek's original series, Season 3. Very excited to talk about this one after last week's episode. But Fert Derby, I don't want to steal any thunder. Take us away.
Thank you, Lord Uther and UrzaMaster and all of us Trekkies who enjoy the Warp Core podcast. We are in the Tholian web. This aired in November 15th, 1968. Richard Nixon has won the White House. Vietnam is still raging. And we have brand new faces behind the camera and at the keyboards for these episodes. The director is Herb Wallerstein. And he had an interesting career and an even more interesting death. Wallerstein started off directing television. He did episodes of The Adventures of Rin Tin Tin, Father Knows Best, I Dream of Jeannie, Mannix. But in 1978, long after this episode, 10 years after this episode of Star Trek reached living rooms, he went to 20th Century Fox Studios and he became the senior vice president of motion pictures, which I think is a step up, if you will. So now, instead of directing these things, he's actually in the C-suites, calling the shots, greenlighting budgets, directors, the whole works. Anyways, while he was at 20th Century Fox, he oversaw the original 1979 Alien from Ridley Scott. He oversaw Dolly Parton, Jane Fonda, and Lily Tomlin's office workplace classic 9 to 5, and Paul Newman's triumphant David Mamet adaptation, The Verdict, in 1982. So he had a pretty good run as a vice president for features at Fox. And it turns out, and I don't want to cast light on what was obviously a tragic situation, but he does have the most interesting backstory of any Star Trek director I think we've had thus far. Herb Wallerstein would later go on to be murdered by his housekeeper with a baseball bat. And then the housekeeper and her boyfriend took the body and burned it up in Wallerstein's car to try to make it look like an accident. Now, when the police arrested her, she pled that she was actually being abused by her employer, and the jury bought it. And a Van Nuys jury later found her not guilty. So his life ended abruptly and tragically, yes. But it does make for a true crime documentary in the making for Herb. So that's who directed the Tholian Web. It was written by Judy Burns and Chet Richards, two writers we have not yet encountered on this voyage. Judy Burns was a committed television writer, and I think Chet Richards just kind of helped her out on this episode. There's not many credits for him. But Judy worked on Tom Selleck's Magnum P.I., Jan Michael Vincent's Airwolf, Richard Anderson's MacGyver, The Bionic Woman, Knight Rider, and T.J. Hooker. So she had her feet firmly planted in 70s, 80s action fare. And this was her first Star Trek there. And gentlemen, I'm glad that DS9 and Voyager and The Next Generation and all of these shows opened up and expanded the idea of what Starfleet spacecraft could look like, because back in 68, every ship looked like the Enterprise because it did save them money. And so we got the USS Defiant, albeit in a refreshing mint flavor for most of the episode. But I'm very glad that we got new looking starships with different nacelle patterns and saucers and the whole like to be able to distinguish one from the other. But yes, we have another Starfleet ship in a bit of trouble. And the opening kind of reminds me of John Carpenter's The Thing, where you beam over to some place that's been ravaged and abandoned and derelict, and there's bodies everywhere on the floor. Obviously, there's no alien monsters that have killed them, but it does have that creepy vibe of, they're all dead, Jim. They're all dead. Sulu and Scotty both get to get the con here. And we are a Kirk-free episode for at least a third, if not a half of it, while he's flailing away in interphase. The Enterprise is trying to fix the problems. And this episode, for this humble viewer, actually fixes a problem that I was going to raise, in so much as that once again we had a McCoy-Spock clash that before it resolves itself. And I think part of the problem in season 3 particularly has been that McCoy and Spock, who are supposed to be getting on each other's nerves but still lifelong pals, sometimes it feels like from the writing standpoint that they're just sort of inventing conflict or trying to put them at each other's throats, and it doesn't feel necessarily in the moment 100% organic. It's like, well, we need them to argue, so here they're going to argue. But this episode, to its credit, resolves all of that with the message from Kirk to be played upon his presumed death, in which he tells them, work together, get over each other's, ingrained tendencies, and you guys are terrific, and I love you. And their response to Kirk's message, although technically he's only presumed dead, that's a great moment for all three of the core three. And like I say, it kind of takes away my misgivings. Had they not included some moment like that, I would have said, yeah, I get it, Spock and McCoy are going to argue about strategy, but it just feels kind of forced to me. Like McCoy just wants to, take the contrarian side and yell and be belligerent, and Spock responds in his cool, calm, collected logic. So yes, that was a misgiving that I strike from the whiteboard. They did a good job there. And to UrzaMaster's point, this is a more polished, well-rounded what Star Trek episode is supposed to be. Again, it may not end up on the Mount Rushmore of episodes overall, but it is a satisfying conclusion, setup. All the pieces are in place. I would have liked to have seen it with the 1960s special effects. The digital ones here look terrific in the upgrade, but I'm curious how they pulled off some of the stuff in the original airing, particularly the weaving of the Tholian web. That would have looked very interesting indeed. What was possible back then, or what were they spending money on back then? But it looks good, and it feels Star Trekian, and that's always a plus here in this up and down season 3. So, gentlemen, did you find yourself caught up in the web?
Absolutely. I was caught up in this episode the whole ride. I think especially after the last couple episodes, which were real downers in terms of the quality of Star Trek, this was refreshing. And I hate to say it, but the fact that there was no Kirk really was nice. The whole series thus far, we barely have episodes that don't prominently feature James T. Kirk. And it was cool to see the rest of the crew responding in a crisis situation, and not just trying to recover Kirk from inner space, but having to deal with a hostile foe, the Tholians, that we've never seen before, that are totally bizarre and have a very slow gotcha type weapon that they're using against them, which, to be honest, is a little cheese, but at the same time, it's a countdown episode, and I normally don't like those. I don't like these, the bomb is going to stop on 1 or 3 or something. You're going to get that Austin Powers Man of Mystery abort at the end. That's going to happen. Even at the time, I'm sure by then they knew, Kirk's just not going to disappear. The Enterprise is not going to get blown up by the Tholians. There's going to be an out. But to get there, I honestly had no idea how it was going to... And, I've seen this episode before, but, rewatching, I'm like, man, I there's no clear giveaway as to the solution. They truly had to rely on each other as a crew, especially McCoy and Spock. And that whole, if you're watching this I'm dead video from Kirk is like, wow. I mean, it's certainly a trope that the 60s used a few times, but I mean, to use it in Star Trek was like, okay, like this is kind of a cool spy type movie deal. I will say the floating Kirk was a little, even with the modern stuff, was a little cheesy. But I didn't hate it. Like it was kind of funny. Like I just like, it I found myself really enjoying the episode as a fan, and it was compelling television. It especially at the time, I think the effects, and I've seen the original effects, and they're of the era, but they weren't bad. I mean, they were certainly okay effects, and definitely I think probably led to, some of the trace coloring that we get in Star Wars and some of the later sci-fi. Obviously before computer generated graphics, that honestly I mean this is one of those foundational episodes again where it's not exactly what you'd think, but the idea of pulling the captain out, the idea of having shall we say ambitious graphics to try and achieve on a very limited budget, and introducing a whole new species that, will we ever encounter them again? I mean, to my memory, I don't know that we have outside of maybe Lower Decks. So I found it thrilling. It was a great episode of Star Trek.
I never thought someone could overact by being silent, but when he's doing the whole "Help me, Spock," like you could hear him overdoing it. And I even thought, yeah, I like the whole message about, I'm dead now, and you guys have to carry on. I felt like he cheesed that up a little bit. I mean, I get what they were going at. I just think he could have acted it a little differently. I like the whole Spock, McCoy, building on that idea that there's some tension between them, even though McCoy finally says, I think it's the space that is bothering me. That's why I kind of yelled at you, and I apologize. But let me tell you this. My favorite part of the entire episode is anytime there was a trippy scene where the person was starting to like trip out a little bit, and you get that 60s like zoom in kind of feeling. Yeah, right. Or like, I think Spock even grabbed someone's head at some point and it was Sulu, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He's like, Sulu, like right in your face. So that was one of my, those are the great ones, right? Where like Spock's head looks all huge. So I like that. But, to your point, UrzaMaster, and this might get brought up in another podcast that we do, this is just good science fiction. Like, this is what we expect from a Star Trek episode. It can stand on its own. It can build to the Star Trek lore, whether it's the Spock-McCoy dynamic or the Tholians being, an enemy of the Federation, however you want to look at that. We're finally getting good sci-fi, which we continue to say is the problem with this season. It's all over the place. There's not enough consistency. But again, overall loved it. Also saw that when the big three left the ship, I think, didn't Scotty get the captain's chair again and Sulu was there? I feel like, have they finally maybe established that chain of command? Because it was kind of back and forth there, I think, in Season 2. And it feels like Scotty's getting the chair a little bit more. Oh, last point. This really bothered me. When they were trying to get Kirk that last time using the transporter, Scotty should have been there for that, right? I mean, Scotty wasn't there. It was McCoy, and you've got a transporter guy trying to bring in Kirk. I would have thought that was just such a big deal. You should have Scotty down there. That was just my last feeling there. Well, and again, we've said this a million times. Sorry, just one more thing, and then I'll pass it off. Can Leonard Nimoy's acting be any better? Did they appreciate this man for what he did? Because, good God, he pulls off the logical, calm Vulcan thing so very well. I don't know if anyone else could have done it as well as him or done it better. And he really think about this. He literally establishes what an entire species, how they should act throughout this series. Like, you expect Vulcans, and we measure every Vulcan against him. I mean, tell me so, right? I mean, every Vulcan we've had is measured up against him. That's how great his acting was, that he establishes the norm for an entire species in a sci-fi series. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
I think Scotty, the last time we saw him, correct me if I'm wrong, he was grabbing that orange Tang-looking beverage, and he's basically like, "I'll be in my quarters." So he probably just he was not in
Mixing it with scotch, yeah.
he was not in any shape to fix the transporter issues there at the end. And
Which is a scary thing that they're in this situation. He's like, I'm just going to go down this orange drink with a bottle of scotch. I hope you guys can handle it. Bye-bye, right? I mean, that's what he does.
Right.
He literally, one of the most important people on the ship, leaves and decides he's going to get loaded. It's crazy.
His shift was up. But I've read William Shatner's memories of Star Trek in the movies, and I've read some behind-the-scenes stuff. I have not read any of Leonard Nimoy's autobiographies or journals, so I know he's covered it himself, and I don't want to speak for him and his thoughts. But however conflicted he was feeling about playing the character of Spock, and whether it would have put him in a lane that he couldn't get out of, in his career, or how he felt about the quality of the shows. I mean, we've already talked about some of the episodes he found embarrassing, or other than that. It really never came through in the performance. I can think of maybe one or two episodes we've watched up till now where I just kind of felt like maybe he was phoning it in, or maybe the writers just didn't give him enough to do, and he was just sort of left, having to play this emotionless, sterile type of Spock in those episodes. But for the most part, as Lord Uther says, I mean, here's a pro's pro. It's like, this is what they want me to say, here's where they want me to stand, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to make you believe it, even if I think it's garbage. And like I say, I mean, William Shatner found some leeway and some runway to, perhaps embellish and embolden and expand his performances. And DeForest Kelley, the Southern gentleman, we've, sometimes caught him winking and playing it a little sly or a little big. But yeah, to his credit, for a character that's supposed to just be a stoic mass of, unfeeling, cold logic, Leonard Nimoy, like I say, you'd never look at him and say, he's having a bad day, it looks like, or his heart wasn't in it. So I applaud him as a professional actor. And that goes through his career, too, if you look at his other work. I know we've talked about Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Fringe and the other things he's appeared in. But yes, thank you, Leonard, for just showing up, hitting your marks, knowing your lines, and doing the work.
I couldn't have more to say about it. It was just one of those really good episodes that I think reminded us in this season 3, where we needed a reminder why we love this show. It was solid writing, not perfect, but solid. Definitely, if somebody was joining Star Trek late and needed a quick episode to sort of jump in and see how do these characters, interact with each other, this would be on that list. Is it absolute must-see Star Trek? No, but it is on my list of recommendations for sure. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about the Tholian Web. Gentlemen, this brings us to our Warp Core ratings. For this episode of Season 3, among the Season 3 episodes, let us not forget, we don't want to be too biased here with an inflated score by comparison of Season 3 and or a deflated score with a comparison of Seasons 1 and 2. So let's keep it real. Lord Uther, how did you feel about the Tholian Web?
All right, I'm going to take the whole Season 3 thing out of it. I'm going to go... I'll go 6 out of 7. I think 7. I think we've established some 7 out of 7 episodes. 6 out of 7. Again, great acting. A little bit of cheese. Would have liked to maybe dig into the Tholians a little bit more, but, and this is a testament to Strange New Worlds, we're definitely going to learn more about them. That's how season 3 ended, if I'm correct, right? It was with the whole Tholian thing happening. So, yeah, I'm going to go 6 out of 7. It was wonderful. How about you there, Fert?
I'm going to be a little lower, but not too much. I'm going to go 5 and a third. I think 6 and above is really strong. I think 4 and below needs more improvement, like most of my report cards from middle school. But I think 5 and a third there says you're on the right path, Trek. And if it was placed in a season 1, season 2, I feel like that's where it would have fallen in those ranges. So, like you say, don't overinflate or punish it too much for where it places. But I think alongside things like the Man Trap or Charlie X, from season 1, I think, or the Nazi episode in season 2, where we go back to Germany in the 40s or so forth. I think this one can hold its own against those. It's certainly a lot better than the Apple. So yeah, I think 5 and a third feels right.
I'm going to go a little higher than that. I'm going to say 5.5. It's not quite a 6. I've given some really good episodes some 6s, but this definitely feels a lot more like a season 2 episode than a season 3 episode to me. This has good writing, great acting. It actually uses that 60s fisheye lens in a way that I appreciate. Where some of the other episodes that have used it, I was like, what in the hell are they? This felt really like a breath of fresh air against the rest of season 3. But I don't want to be too biased here. Like it's still not hitting those high notes, but it's enough to where I do think it deserves a place on the list of you should watch these Star Trek episodes. So, gentlemen, I look forward to the next few episodes of Star Trek, the original series that we have left. We'll be winding down season 3 over the next couple of weeks, so looking forward to those next steps on this end of that 5-year, 3-year journey with Captain Kirk and crew. But until we get to that next episode, live long and prosper.